Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. You contacted me well over 6 or 8 months ago and tried to get on a previous recording sessions that I had, and just something happened. We weren't able to connect. So you've been sitting around waiting for quite some time. So finally we get to meet.
Well, it is good to meet you. My schedule has been a little crazy. We moved around Thanksgiving, and I think that might have been the
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
So I've definitely been busy, but I have been looking forward to this interview.
Okay. Well, here we are, finally doing it. And we'll be talking about two of your books. And before we do that, though, I'd really like to know more about you, who you are, and what got you to write these books in the first place.
Well, I don't know how far back you want me to go. I was born in Conyers, Georgia. It's around Atlanta. Kind of born and raised here. I went to college and became a teacher, and I've been teaching now for about 19 years. But a few years ago, I had some time on my hands, and I thought I would dabble a little bit in writing. I did a little bit in college, but never anything serious. But as an English teacher, I found myself frustrated by students who uh, complain about English teachers making up stuff, or they accuse us of inserting symbolism in stories. And well, how do you know the author meant this or that? So I decided to write a collection of short stories so that I could answer those questions for them. Like, this is what the author meant.
Wow.
So that was my first book, Ripples.
Okay, that's an interesting topic. Yes, how can one really know for sure what the author meant? As a, for example, um, the book Animal Farm.
Mm-hmm.
I read it to my son when he was 10 years old, and he just liked it because animals talked and the mean old farmer kind of thing. But it is kind of indicative of the communism and the overthrow of the Russian Tsar and all that. Yeah, I mean, it could be that. That's what I learned in school. I remember. Interesting
Yeah.
point. So tell me about Ripples.
So Ripples is a collection of seven different short stories, all dealing with different characters, different places, different times. But each story kind of has this undercurrent, this underlying theme of choices and consequences. The actions that we take and what results from those actions. They're not particularly happy stories. There's some messy topics. There's racism. There's abuse, suicide. There's a lot of these sort of darker things in there. Because I find that the stories that I write aren't really about like the happy, fun side of human nature. I like to sort of dig into the dark, corners and kind of see what's there.
Okay. So how long would you say each story is?
Uh, it varies a little bit. The shortest story is about a page and a half, and the longest story in there I think is maybe 6, 7, 8 pages. Each one is as long as it needs to be. Like I found
Okay.
myself, you know, thinking, well, this story should be longer. I need to add more, but if it was done, I felt it was done.
Okay. Now, you said at the outset that the point was something to do with your students asking, how do you know what the author meant by the symbolism? And I brought up Animal Farm. Were you thinking about each of these stories having some kind of symbolism allegorically or however?
Some of them, yes. Some of them are very intentional in the symbolism that I used, certain objects or people. And I think the larger point I really wanted to make was that authors make decisions very clearly about their work. And sometimes the curtains are just blue. Sometimes they they add details or change things just because that's what comes to mind. But a lot of things are very intentional. And I wanted to show them this is why I used this word in this sentence. This is why I made this thing this color. But
Oh.
these things over here, this guy's shirt, it just looks like that because that's a shirt I have. And that's what I use to describe it. So I just wanted to show them that authors really do make these very intentional choices. Now, whether the audience can always know those, that's not always possible.
Well, it's interesting that you have students to share your work with and then show them, like, you get a chance to write a book and write these stories, which in itself, that's not only just an accomplishment, but it feels good to be able to do that. And then to share it with your
Mm-hmm.
students. That's quite unique. I'm very impressed with that. What do they have to
Well,
say
thank you.
about it?
Um, the first time they see the book itself, they're sort of blown away. Oh my God, you wrote a book. And, in my, I guess, humility, I'm always explaining, no. This is anybody can upload a book to Amazon. Like this is self-published. It's not going to be famous or anything like that. But they do seem to be a little surprised and a little impressed, I guess, that I wrote the book. And then when we get into it and they see how the stories are crafted, and I explain some things to them, and I allow them to sort of talk about it and explore the ideas in the stories, some of them really do get into it. Some of
Mhm.
them, nothing is going to interest them in terms of literature. So I do the best I can with those.
Do they all have a copy of your book?
Previously, I have just made photocopies of it, but this year I did actually order like a class set of the author copies
Right.
from Amazon, just at my own expense, just because
Sure.
for them to have the book in their hand, I think would make it a better experience for them, and it really has been.
Excellent.
My students this year have really sort of enjoyed even just seeing the cover, and I don't know, they enjoy having the book in their
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah. And talking about the cover, how did you come up with that?
So I initially had I designed one from the Amazon sort of template page, and it was not very good. So when I went to I tried to get it published through a company called Dark Frog, a little independent publisher, and I went through that company and got into a few private bookstores. Um, and then, but the guy told me, he's like, look, the cover, you got to do something about the cover. So I went in and I sort of redesigned it, and I was trying to pick out pieces from individual stories that would kind of reflect some of the themes. Like the water is obviously, indicative of one of the primary settings in the stories. And there's a young man and an old man, because there's some thematic things
Yeah.
about, like, as we grow older and the things we remember and regret and things like that. But I just wanted to have kind of a a cover that would sort of engage, I guess, potential readers.
Yeah. It's very nice. I like it. I like cover. So, what do other teachers in your school think about you having written a book and now that's part of your curriculum? Or is it part of your curriculum?
It's not really an official part of the curriculum. I use it to, because I mean, the way that we teach English courses, we're basically guided by state standards, things like vocabulary and making inferences from text and stuff like that. So I can pretty much pull almost any book off of any shelf and work it in somehow. A couple of the other teachers know about it. I don't talk about it too much. One administrator was doing an observation in my room when I happened to be reading one of the stories with my kids, and he, he seemed very impressed, and he wanted a copy of it, so I gave him a copy.
Neat.
But I don't talk about it too much with the other teachers.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a book of short stories. I noticed the other book you have.
Yeah, the other one is Judas Wept. That's another collection of short stories.
It's interesting. Is it also has dark stories?
A couple of them are, yeah, there's some dark themes in that one, but there's also a lot more humor in those stories, and there's more sort of adult language and things, because Ripples was intended to be taught to high school students, so I stayed away from sexual content and profanity and things like that. But in this one, the characters, some of them have potty mouths,
Hmm.
and I did my best to sort of rein them in a little bit, but they didn't listen. So,
It's a whole different way of
but
writing, isn't it? You know?
it
Yeah.
is, yeah, yeah.
I only did that once and it felt strange writing those words, but the characters, it suited them. So, all right. So how long is that book, Judas Wept?
It's another seven stories, but these on average are a little bit longer. I don't remember the word counts or anything off the top of my head, but it's a good bit longer. It's still not, it's not going to take you, a week or so to read it. If you could still read it in the evening. But these are a little bit more in, I guess, more detailed in some ways. They're the plots are a little more involved. So these stories do have a bit more length to them.
Okay. And they're not interlocked in any way. It sounds like a takeoff of previous stories, an independent story, each
No,
one.
no, yeah, each one is an independent story.
Right. So you seem to like writing short stories.
I do. Of course, like almost every writer, I would love to write a novel, and I have many ideas, and I've got, a couple of half finished things floating around. But I find that short stories are really fun and interesting to write, because you get to spend a small amount of time looking at like a snapshot of human experience, and you don't have to worry about all of the overarching themes and the growth of the main character and all those things that come with the novel. They don't they're not very commercial. People aren't out there buying short stories, but I don't really write them for that reason. I write them just because I like to write, and the few people who do pick it
Yeah.
up, I hope they enjoy them.
Yeah. Have you ever considered submitting some of your short stories to compilations? I know there's some publishers who take a bunch of short stories from different people, and you can be one of them.
I've I've submitted it a couple of stories a couple of times. I haven't really put a lot of energy into it. I would like to. Of course, I'd love to be published, but I haven't really spent a lot of time pursuing that avenue of it.
Mhm. Are any of your stories horror, your classical horror stories?
No, I would probably define most of them as sort of literary fiction rather than any sort of genre fiction.
Hmm.
There there is one short story in Judas Wept about a man who gets entangled with some copperheads, and that has a bit of I think I was maybe sort of going for a Stephen King kind of vibe. It's a horrible story, uh, the experience this man has.
It sounds
But I
like.
haven't yeah, I haven't dabbled too much in the horror genre.
I only ask because things like horror and science fiction, those are pretty
Mm,
cultic things, and there's all kinds of online publications, nothing, no big publishers, and they're
mm,
always looking for short stories to put into their, I guess, pulp fiction kind of thing. And
mm.
yeah, I've met a few people like that. They're very open to submissions. And which book came first?
So Ripples came first, and actually it grew sort of out of the very first story in that collection was one that I had drafted many years ago. I think about 2012. I wrote the first draft of that, and I remember thinking, all right, I want to write this collection. I've already got this one story, so I'll just polish it up, and the others just kind of grew out of that. And then later, after I kind of wrapped that one up and I published it and gotten the cover and all that stuff done, I just had more ideas. I've got a thing of notes in my phone where I've probably got several dozen story ideas that I just haven't gotten to yet.
Hmm.
But I've decided to do another collection, and they're different stories, but they all have a similar underlying theme, sort of like Ripples. But this time, it's more about the idea of justice, and what does
Yeah,
justice mean, and like, do we actually ever get justice? You know, that
yeah,
that kind
sure,
of take.
sure. At the when we began this conversation, you told me about yourself, and you said a few that when you were in college, you did some writing, dabbled in it, but it was a few years ago you actually sat down and wrote these. Was this something you wrote during the pandemic?
Ripples was pre-pandemic. This was
Okay,
2018
okay.
or so. Some of the stuff in I think Judas Wept was. I think that was also pre-pandemic. I did work a little bit on a novel during the pandemic, but didn't quite get there. Didn't quite finish that one.
Yeah. Well, it's a certain discipline, and I know I would have a hard time writing short stories because I'm very wordy. So I think that it takes a certain skill to
Mhm.
wrap up a story, make it interesting, all in, what would can be considered a short story. Yeah, that would be difficult
Yeah,
for me to do.
that is one of my biggest challenges because I do tend to be very wordy when I write. So a large portion of the work is actually in the edit. Something
Okay,
that kind of surprised me.
so you send them out to get edited, or do you do it yourself?
I do it myself for the most part. I have a few other people look at it. My wife is also an English teacher, and this actually Ripples was written right. It was before we got married, and I was sending her like bits of the stories, like what do you think about this, and she gave me lots of great feedback.
Well, there you go. I mean, you got built-in editing, and you got both English teachers, of course. I wish I had an
Yeah,
English teacher friend to help me out sometimes, but I did very well in English. That was one of my majors. How are sales for you?
not good because
Yeah,
I didn't really publicize it too much. I sort of
right.
announced it on Facebook, like, "Hey, everybody, I wrote some stories." So I
Sure.
sold a few copies, family and friends, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that hasn't, I didn't go into it really intending to have um, a wide sales base. But last year I did actually, I've had people ask me about doing an audiobook version, and I thought, well, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but I actually did start a podcast where I was reading the stories,
Okay.
sort of performing them, and that was a fun but very frustrating experience in some ways, because
Okay.
writing the stories is one thing, but reading them and hearing my own voice and having to edit out, little breathing noises and bumping the microphone and mispronouncing a word or leaving out a word, the
Sure.
hours and hours of editing was
Yes. Yes. Not for
was
everybody. I
difficult. I'm
enjoy doing that kind of
sure you
stuff, but
understand.
I understand. I've been doing
Yeah,
it long enough.
yeah,
It's a difficult job. Well, the
it
reason
definitely
I
is.
brought it up with you is because I really got your vibe quickly when you started explaining what these books are for, and especially Ripples. And what I like to do as we wind down the conversation is give you an opportunity to speak to the audience and give them your best pitch about why they should consider buying these books. Though I understand where you're coming from. If you're comfortable doing that, we can do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, let's hear why people should buy this book.
Well, Ripples especially is really about what makes us human. The idea of the choices that we make and how those choices affect us and those around us. These are some of the scenarios the characters are in are, not common or usual at all, but the types of things that they experience and the feelings they experience, and what goes through their heads. Some of these things are things we face all the time about, should I do this or that? What's going to happen if I do this or that? How long should I hold on to this regret? So I think the themes and the stories are really, what people are going to get something out of.
Okay. You remind me of why I've always liked my English teachers. You know, classes were always interesting. It was just my thing. I really liked that. And drama. It's pretty good.
Yeah, loved those classes myself. Yeah,
So these books are available on Amazon, I take it.
yes, they are on Amazon.
Okay. Anywhere else?
There's a few select bookstores in Georgia, little independent bookstores. I don't exactly have the list on me, but
Okay.
that's about it. Yeah, it's a pretty
Okay.
short range.
All right. Wow. I really enjoyed talking with you. I like what you're doing. It's very impressive. And I hope that you're going to be writing some more soon, some more short stories.
Yes, I have quite a few sort of lined up that I want to take those ideas and expand them and write them. Right now we're winding down the school year. We've got some state testing coming up, so things are a little hectic now. But
For
probably
sure.
this summer I'll sit down and I'll knock a few of them out.
Okay, Andrew. You write another book and you get back to me and we'll have you back on the show. I look forward to that.
I will. I'd love to.
All right. It was nice meeting you.
All right. Nice meeting you. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You can also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.